The cruelest betrayals are never committed by strangers. They come from the people who smile while they erase your place at the table. Jasmine Brooks stood at the far end of the executive boardroom with her hands loosely folded in front of her, refusing to let anyone see them shake. The wall of floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked downtown Chicago, where the morning traffic crawled beneath a gray November sky. Inside Halcyon Capital Group headquarters, however, the room felt strangely warm, almost celebratory. Logan Pierce sat confidently at the head of the polished walnut table, his tailored navy suit fitting him as perfectly as the smile on his face. Beside him sat Sienna Blake, dressed in cream-colored designer clothing that looked more suited for a magazine cover than a board meeting. Across the table, Logan's parents exchanged approving glances while several senior executives quietly avoided looking at Jasmine altogether. They already knew how this meeting would end. Logan slowly stood and buttoned his jacket. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Today marks a new chapter for our company." His voice carried the same calm confidence Jasmine had once admired, back when she believed confidence and integrity belonged together. Halcyon needs fresh leadership, fresh energy, and a public image that reflects where we're headed. He turned toward Sienna with a smile that seemed carefully rehearsed. Sienna has already become an important part of that future. A few polite claps echoed around the room. Jasmine noticed they came mostly from people who depended on the Pierce family for their paychecks. Logan's mother, Victoria Pierce, reached across the table and warmly squeezed Sienna's hand before looking directly at Jasmine. "Some people are meant to build," she said sweetly. "Others are only meant to support from the sidelines." The words landed harder than Jasmine expected, not because they surprised her, but because they confirmed something she had been refusing to admit for months. Logan's father leaned back comfortably in his chair. "Let's not drag this out," he said. "This family has already made its choice." Silence settled over the room. Jasmine looked from one familiar face to another. Men and women she had interviewed herself. Executives she had trained. Employees who had once knocked on her office door asking for advice. Not one person spoke. Not one person questioned what was happening. Logan finally met her eyes. "This is better for everyone," he said quietly. "You don't belong here anymore." There was a time those words would have broken her. Today they simply hurt. There was a difference. Jasmine reached up slowly and unclipped the silver employee badge hanging from her blazer. The plastic card carried years of 18-hour workdays, canceled vacations, late-night investor presentations, and countless sacrifices no one in this room would ever acknowledge. She placed it gently on the conference table instead of throwing it down. "You don't have to worry," she said, her voice calm enough to surprise even herself. "I'm leaving." Nobody stopped her. Nobody thanked her. As she walked toward the glass doors, she heard Sienna laugh softly behind her, followed by Victoria's voice. "Now this company finally looks the way it should." Jasmine kept walking. The elevator doors closed, cutting off the sound before another word could reach her. She stared at her own reflection in the brushed steel doors. Her eyes looked tired, but they weren't defeated. For the first time in years, there was nothing left for anyone inside that building to take from her. Outside, a long black sedan rolled quietly to the front entrance. The elderly man stepping out wasn't surrounded by security or photographers. His charcoal overcoat looked ordinary. His expression revealed nothing. The receptionist hurried toward him. "Good morning, sir. May I ask who you're here to see?" The man offered a polite smile before handing over a simple black business card. "No appointment," he replied evenly. "Please let the Pierce family know the company's true owner has arrived." People rarely notice the person holding a company together until the day that person quietly walks away. Jasmine Brooks did not drive home after leaving Halcyon Capital Group. Instead, she pulled into a quiet parking lot overlooking Lake Michigan and turned off the engine. The silence inside her aging SUV felt almost unfamiliar. For years, every free moment had belonged to someone else. Logan's schedule, Logan's investors, Logan's family's expectations. She rested both hands on the steering wheel and stared at the water without blinking. Her phone vibrated 3 times. The first message came from a former coworker. "I am so sorry." The second was from Human Resources asking where they should send her final paperwork. The third came from Logan himself. "I hope you understand this was only business." Jasmine read it once before locking her phone without replying. "Business." She whispered the word to herself and almost laughed. There had never been anything businesslike about the life she had built for him. 7 years earlier, Logan had been the ambitious son of a respected family with more confidence than cash. Jasmine had been the one with experience in corporate finance, the one who knew how to prepare investor presentations, negotiate lending terms, and calm nervous partners before difficult meetings. Their first office had been barely 700 square feet above an old bakery on the north side of Chicago. The heating barely worked during the winter, and every dollar mattered. They shared one coffee maker, 2 folding desks, and dreams that seemed much bigger than the room around them. Logan loved telling people he had built everything from nothing. Jasmine never corrected him. When investors canceled meetings, she called until she found replacements. When payroll came up short, she quietly postponed buying herself new clothes so employees would receive their checks on time. She remembered spending Christmas Eve alone in the office balancing financial forecasts while Logan attended his parents' holiday party because they believed family appearances mattered more than spreadsheets. She had convinced herself that sacrifices were temporary. Success would make everything worthwhile. Instead, success changed the people around her. Logan slowly stopped introducing her as his partner. She became his wife. Then she became someone who should stay home during networking dinners because, according to his mother, executives preferred polished appearances. Jasmine remembered Victoria smiling as she adjusted Sienna's necklace during company events long before anyone publicly acknowledged the relationship. Looking back, the warning signs had always been there. She had simply believed loyalty would eventually be recognized. It never was. Her phone rang again. This time it was Daniel Foster, the company's longtime legal counsel. She hesitated before answering. "Jasmine," he said carefully, "I know today has been difficult. That is one way to describe it." Daniel lowered his voice. "I cannot explain everything over the phone, but I need you to answer one question honestly. Did you keep every original document from the company's first year?" Jasmine frowned. "Of course I did. You told me years ago never to throw anything away." There was a brief silence before Daniel quietly replied, "Good. Keep them somewhere safe. Do not let anyone talk you into handing them over." Before she could ask why, he added, "Someone walked into headquarters about 10 minutes after you left. I have never seen the Pierce family look frightened before today." The line went quiet. Jasmine slowly looked back toward the Chicago skyline in the distance. For the first time since leaving that boardroom, she felt something she had almost forgotten. It was not hope. Not yet. It was the quiet feeling that the story everyone believed was already over had only just begun. The fastest way to lose power is to believe everyone in the room is loyal simply because they are smiling. Back inside Halcyon Capital Group, the atmosphere had changed so quickly that even the assistants outside the executive floor stopped whispering. Logan stood near the conference table, watching the elderly visitor remove his overcoat with calm, deliberate movements. There was nothing flashy about the man. No expensive watch displayed for attention. No dramatic entrance. Yet somehow every conversation in the room had died the moment he walked in. Victoria Pierce frowned. "I am sorry, but I believe there has been some misunderstanding. This is a private executive meeting." The man nodded politely. "I understand." He handed a sealed envelope to Daniel Foster without another word. Daniel accepted it with both hands, his expression tightening before he carefully broke the seal. Logan crossed his arms. "Who exactly are you?" The visitor looked directly at him. "Nathaniel Cross." Logan waited, expecting the name to mean something. It did not. He forced a smile. "I am afraid I have never heard of you." Nathaniel did not appear offended. "That has always been intentional." Daniel quietly removed several documents from the envelope. His eyes moved across the first page before he looked up at Logan. "We need to pause today's meeting." Logan's patience disappeared. "Pause it. We have investors arriving in less than 1 hour." "Then they will have to wait," Daniel answered. "These documents take legal priority." Sienna shifted uneasily in her chair. "This is ridiculous. We cannot stop an entire company because someone walked in with paperwork." Daniel ignored her and continued reading. Around the table, several executives exchanged nervous glances. One of the senior accountants slowly opened his laptop and began comparing the documents with internal corporate records. Within seconds, his confident expression disappeared. "Logan," he said carefully, "there is something unusual." Logan stepped closer. "What are you talking about?" The accountant turned the screen toward him. There is a founding ownership agreement referenced here that does not appear in the files we normally use. Victoria immediately shook her head. Impossible. Our family has controlled this company from the beginning. Nathaniel finally spoke again. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. Control and ownership are not always the same thing. Those words settled over the room like heavy rain. Logan felt his jaw tighten. If you are trying to intimidate us, it is not going to work. Nathaniel simply looked at him for a long moment before asking one quiet question. Do you know who negotiated the company's first investment agreement 7 years ago? Logan answered without hesitation. I did. Daniel slowly closed the folder. According to these records, he stopped, choosing his words carefully. That is not entirely accurate. Silence filled the room again. Logan searched every face around the table, expecting someone to laugh, to dismiss the situation, to reassure him that everything remained under control. Nobody did. Even his father looked uncertain for the first time in years. Downstairs, employees had already begun noticing that executives were no longer leaving the boardroom. Rumors spread from office to office. Some said federal regulators had arrived. Others believed investors were pulling out. Nobody guessed the truth. Meanwhile, several miles away, Jasmine unlocked the front door of her quiet townhouse. She placed her purse on the kitchen counter and noticed an old storage box sitting in the hallway closet. It was the box Daniel had reminded her about. Inside were years of contracts, handwritten notes, meeting binders, and the earliest records from Halcyon's first days. She knelt beside it and slowly lifted the lid. Resting on top was a faded blue folder with her own handwriting across the front. Founding documents. Jasmine stared at it without touching a single page. Somehow, after all these years, the past had started knocking on her door again. The truth rarely arrives all at once. It begins with one forgotten piece of paper that everyone else assumed had already disappeared. Jasmine carried the faded blue folder to her dining room table and carefully opened it. Every page inside carried memories she had tried to bury along with her marriage. There were handwritten notes from coffee shop meetings, early financial projections covered with coffee stains, investor feedback, and legal drafts from the months before Halcyon Capital Group officially opened its doors. She slowly turned each page until one document made her stop. It was the original memorandum from the company's first private funding meeting. At the bottom sat 3 signatures. Hers, Daniel Foster's, and Nathaniel Cross's. Logan's signature was nowhere on the page. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, trying to steady her breathing. How did I forget this? She whispered. Her phone rang before she could reach for another file. Daniel did not waste time on greetings. Jasmine, where are you? At home. Good. Stay there. Do not meet anyone from the Pierce family. Her heart tightened. What happened? Daniel lowered his voice. Logan has realized there are original documents missing from the corporate archive. Jasmine looked down at the folder again. Because they are here. Exactly. She could hear muffled voices behind him. Someone was arguing. Another person slammed a conference room door. Daniel continued. Nathaniel asked one question that nobody in that boardroom could answer. What question? He asked who legally documented the company's founding structure. Nobody said your name. Jasmine closed her eyes. That answer hurt more than she expected. Years of work had disappeared so completely that even the people who built the company beside her no longer remembered she had been there. Daniel spoke again. Nathaniel already knew the answer. He wanted to see who would tell the truth. Before Jasmine could respond, another call flashed across her screen. Logan. She stared at his name for several seconds before answering. His voice sounded controlled, but only barely. Where are the original files? Jasmine remained silent. Do not play games with me, Logan snapped. Daniel says you kept copies. You mean the records that nobody thought mattered this morning? She asked quietly. Logan exhaled sharply. This is bigger than us now. It always was. There was another long silence. Then Logan tried a different approach. Come back to the office. We can fix this together. Jasmine almost smiled. It was the first time he had used the word together in months. No, she answered. You already decided we were finished. I accepted your decision. She ended the call before he could answer. Across town, Logan lowered his phone and slammed it onto the conference table. Sienna stepped closer. She is bluffing. She just wants attention. Nathaniel calmly looked at her. People who seek attention usually make noise. Jasmine Brooks walked away without saying a word. Nobody challenged him. Daniel entered carrying another folder from the legal archives. There is something else. Every eye in the room turned toward him. Tomorrow morning the board is scheduled to approve the Crescent Biosystems acquisition. Logan nodded impatiently. We cannot delay that deal. Daniel looked directly at Nathaniel before speaking. Actually, unless the founding ownership is verified before the vote, the acquisition cannot legally move forward. Every signature will be invalid. The room fell completely silent. A $3 billion transaction was now hanging by a thread, and the one person holding the missing pieces was the woman they had pushed out of the building only hours earlier. Hundreds of employees, dozens of investors, and the future of Halcyon itself were suddenly waiting on someone the Pierce family had dismissed as yesterday's problem. And by sunrise, the entire company would discover just how expensive that mistake was. Success has a strange way of exposing people who were only pretending to deserve it. By 8 o'clock the next morning, Halcyon Capital Group no longer felt like the confident company employees had walked into the day before. Television screens in the lobby cycled through financial news while analysts speculated about an unexpected delay in the Crescent Biosystems acquisition. No official explanation had been released, but the rumor mill was moving faster than the elevators. Inside the executive boardroom, every chair was occupied again, although this time nobody looked comfortable. Logan had barely slept. His tie hung slightly crooked, and the untouched cup of coffee beside him had already gone cold. Across the table, Sienna tried to sound optimistic. Once the lawyers clear this up, everyone will forget about yesterday. Logan did not even look at her. You do not know that. Victoria folded her hands together. Nathaniel Cross has not proven anything. Before anyone else could answer, Daniel Foster entered carrying a slim black portfolio. Actually, he said calmly, he does not need to prove very much. The burden is on us now. Logan stood. Explain. Daniel placed several documents in front of the board members. Every institutional investor involved in today's acquisition has requested confirmation of the company's founding ownership before releasing final approval. Logan frowned. Because of one visitor? Because that visitor submitted documentation none of us can ignore. The chief financial officer cleared his throat. There is another issue. He tapped his tablet and projected a spreadsheet onto the large screen. Our escrow account has entered temporary compliance review. Sienna looked confused. What does that even mean? It means the funds cannot move until ownership authority is confirmed. A heavy silence settled over the room. Every minute the deal remained frozen was costing the company money, confidence, and credibility. Logan finally turned toward Nathaniel, who had remained remarkably quiet since arriving. If this is about leverage, tell me your number. Nathaniel slowly shook his head. You still believe this is a negotiation? Then what is it? Logan demanded. Nathaniel answered without raising his voice. It is accountability. Those two words seemed to echo through the room. Meanwhile, Jasmine sat across from Daniel's longtime colleague, attorney Rebecca Lawson, in a quiet office overlooking the river. The blue folder rested on the conference table between them. Rebecca carefully examined each page before removing a pair of reading glasses. These originals have been preserved extremely well. Jasmine nodded. Daniel always insisted I keep everything. Rebecca looked directly at her. He was right. She carefully slid one document toward Jasmine. Do you remember signing this? Jasmine studied the page before her expression changed. It was not just another agreement. It was the original governance letter establishing who would serve as custodian of the founding corporate records until every ownership condition had been fulfilled. At the bottom of the page, beside Nathaniel Cross's signature, was her own. Rebecca spoke gently. Jasmine, whether you realized it or not, you accepted a legal responsibility 7 years ago that never expired. Jasmine stared at the signature she had not thought about in years. Suddenly dozens of forgotten conversations returned to her. Nathaniel telling her that integrity mattered more than titles. Daniel reminding her to never discard the early records. Small moments that had seemed ordinary now fit together like pieces of a puzzle. Back at Halcyon, an assistant hurried into the boardroom carrying a sealed envelope marked immediate delivery. She handed it directly to Daniel. He opened it, scanned the first page, then slowly looked around the table. The shareholders have called for an emergency meeting at noon. Logan felt his stomach tighten. For what purpose? Daniel met his eyes without hesitation. To determine who has the legal authority to speak for Halcyon Capital Group. At that moment, everyone in the room finally understood that the next meeting would not simply decide the future of a company. It would reveal who had truly been standing behind it from the very beginning. The people who tell you that titles matter the most have usually forgotten who built the foundation beneath those titles. Just before noon, the executive floor at Halcyon Capital Group was quieter than anyone had ever seen it. The usual chatter had disappeared, replaced by nervous glances and closed office doors. Employees sensed something extraordinary was unfolding, even if nobody knew the full story. Jasmine stepped out of the elevator with Rebecca Lawson beside her, carrying nothing more than the worn blue folder that had spent years untouched in her hallway closet. Heads turned as she walked through the lobby. A few employees offered hesitant smiles. Others looked down, embarrassed that they had watched her leave the previous day without saying a word. Jasmine did not blame them. Fear had a way of making decent people stay silent. Daniel met them outside the shareholder conference room. "You made it," he said with visible relief. Jasmine nodded. "I almost did not come." Daniel smiled gently. "I know, but this meeting was never really about winning. It is about finally putting the truth where everyone can see it." Inside the room, Logan immediately noticed her. He stood so quickly that his chair scraped across the floor. "Jasmine." She looked at him calmly. "Logan." For a brief second, neither of them spoke. He looked exhausted, the confidence that had filled yesterday's board meeting replaced by uncertainty. "Can we talk before this starts?" he asked. Jasmine glanced toward the large conference table where shareholders were already taking their seats. "We had plenty of chances to talk," she answered. "You chose an audience instead." Her words were quiet, but they landed harder than if she had shouted them. Sienna folded her arms and stepped closer. "This whole performance is unnecessary. If you wanted recognition, you could have asked for it years ago." Jasmine looked at her without anger. Recognition was never the point. Nathaniel Cross entered at that moment, and the room instinctively fell silent. He greeted several shareholders by name, something Logan immediately noticed. These were people who barely acknowledged the Pierce family during ordinary meetings, yet they welcomed Nathaniel with genuine respect. Logan leaned toward Daniel. "Who was he really?" Daniel answered without taking his eyes off the room. "Someone who never needed publicity to have influence." The emergency meeting officially began. The chairperson welcomed everyone before turning to Nathaniel. "Mr. Cross, you requested this session. You have the floor." Nathaniel remained seated. "Actually," he said, "I believe someone else should speak first." Every face turned toward Jasmine. She looked surprised. "Me?" Nathaniel nodded once. 7 years ago, you accepted a responsibility that none of us expected would become necessary. Today is the day it matters." Jasmine slowly stood, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. She opened the blue folder and carefully removed the first document. Her fingers paused for just a moment before she placed it on the presentation table. "When Halcyon was founded," she began, "everyone focused on who would become the public face of the company. Almost nobody asked who protected its future." She slid another document beside the first, then another. Every page carried original signatures, dates, and handwritten notes from the company's earliest days. The shareholders leaned forward as the documents were passed around the room. Logan watched in complete silence. He recognized some of the pages, but others he had never seen before. Victoria's confident expression slowly disappeared. Even Sienna stopped whispering. Then one elderly shareholder adjusted his glasses and quietly asked the question that changed everything. "Why is every foundational document signed by Jasmine Brooks, but almost none of them bear Logan Pierce's signature?" The room became so still that the sound of papers turning seemed impossibly loud. Logan opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Across the table, Nathaniel finally looked directly at him. "That," he said calmly, "is exactly where the Real story begins. The biggest lie in every betrayal is not what people say. It is what they choose to leave out." Nobody spoke after the shareholder asked why Jasmine's signature appeared on nearly every founding document, while Logan's name was missing from most of them. The silence stretched across the room until Nathaniel Cross slowly stood. He buttoned his charcoal jacket and walked toward the presentation screen without the slightest hint of urgency. 7 years ago, he began, I was looking for someone to help build a financial company that would outlive personalities, headlines, and family influence. I was not looking for the loudest person in the room. I was looking for the most trustworthy one. He pressed a button on the remote. The screen filled with scanned copies of handwritten meeting notes, early investment schedules, and emails exchanged during Halcyon's first months. Every document carried timestamps, signatures, and legal certifications. Nathaniel pointed to the first page. This was our initial funding proposal. Then the second. This was the governance structure. Then the third. This was the contingency agreement in case leadership ever failed its fiduciary responsibility. Logan stared at the screen as if he had never seen his own company's history before. "Why was I never shown these?" he demanded. Daniel answered before Nathaniel could. "Because you never asked to review the original archive. Once the company became profitable, everyone relied on updated corporate records instead." Nathaniel looked directly at Logan. "You were focused on growth. Jasmine protected the foundation." Across the table, Jasmine remained standing, her hands resting lightly on the blue folder. She did not look proud. She looked almost saddened that the truth had finally reached this point. One shareholder raised his hand. "Mr. Cross, are you telling us that Mrs. Brooks secretly owned this company?" Nathaniel shook his head. "No, that is not what happened." Several people exchanged confused looks. He continued, "Ownership and stewardship are different responsibilities. I remained the principal owner. Jasmine accepted the legal duty of protecting the founding agreements until every condition written into them had been fulfilled. She never controlled the company for herself. She protected it for everyone." Victoria Pierce leaned forward, her voice trembling with frustration. "Then why would you trust her instead of our family?" Nathaniel answered without hesitation. "Because during our earliest meetings, only one person consistently asked how decisions would affect employees instead of shareholders." He turned toward Jasmine with quiet respect. She believed a successful company should deserve its success. That answer told me everything I needed to know. Logan lowered his eyes. Fragments of old conversations returned to him. Jasmine asking him to slow down before signing risky contracts. Jasmine insisting employees receive bonuses during difficult years. Jasmine reminding him that trust took longer to build than revenue. At the time, he had dismissed those concerns as unnecessary caution. Now he realized they had been warnings. Sienna suddenly pushed back her chair. "This is completely unfair. None of this changes who has been running the company." Nathaniel calmly looked at her. "Running something and earning the right to lead it are not always the same." Before anyone could respond, the conference room doors opened once again. An assistant hurried inside carrying a tablet, her face noticeably pale. "I am sorry to interrupt," she said, struggling to catch her breath. "The institutional investors have finished reviewing the preliminary documents." Every head turned toward her. "They have issued a formal notice." Daniel accepted the tablet and silently read the message. His expression became more serious with every line. Logan stepped forward. "What does it say?" Daniel slowly looked up. "Until the board determines lawful executive authority, every pending transaction is suspended." He paused for one more breath before delivering the sentence that made the room freeze. "And the investors are requesting an immediate vote on whether the current leadership should remain in place." Logan felt the floor disappear beneath him. For the first time since Halcyon had opened its doors, the future of the company was no longer in his hands. It was now sitting in the hands of the very woman he had believed would simply walk away forever. The moment people realize they chose the wrong side is usually the moment it is too late to switch. No one moved after Daniel announced the investors' demand. The conference room, once filled with confidence and polished speeches, suddenly felt much smaller. Logan slowly lowered himself into his chair, rubbing his forehead as though he could somehow erase the last 24 hours. Across the table, Jasmine remained standing beside the blue folder. She had not raised her voice once since walking back into Halcyon. She had not insulted anyone. She had simply allowed the truth to speak for itself. Victoria Pierce broke the silence first. "Jasmine," she said, her tone softer than it had been the day before. "Perhaps we all allowed emotions to cloud our judgment." Jasmine looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Yesterday, your judgment seemed very clear." Victoria swallowed. "Families make mistakes." Jasmine nodded gently. "They do. But what happened yesterday was not a mistake. It was a decision." Logan finally looked up. His confidence was gone, replaced by something much closer to regret. "I should have listened to you." Jasmine met his eyes without anger. "There were many times you could have." He leaned forward, speaking quietly enough that only those nearest could hear. If I apologize now, would it make any difference? Jasmine did not answer immediately. She thought about the tiny office above the bakery, the late nights, the skipped holidays, the promises they made when success still felt far away. Then she remembered standing alone in the boardroom while every member of his family chose someone else without hesitation. An apology can acknowledge the past, she finally said. It cannot rewrite it. Her words settled over the room with painful honesty. Sienna suddenly stood, unable to hide her frustration any longer. This is unbelievable. Everyone is acting like she is some kind of hero. She left. She walked away. Nathaniel calmly turned toward her. No. His voice remained steady. She was dismissed. There is a difference. Sienna folded her arms. Either way, the company cannot keep looking backward. Nathaniel gave a slight nod. I agree. That is why today is about the future. He walked to the head of the conference table and placed a single sealed envelope in front of the chairperson. Before this board votes, there is one final document that has not yet been reviewed. Daniel looked genuinely surprised. There are more. Nathaniel smiled faintly. Only one. The chairperson carefully opened the envelope and unfolded several pages. As his eyes moved across the document, his expression changed from curiosity to disbelief. I have not seen anything like this before. Logan stood again. What is it? The chairperson looked toward Nathaniel. This appears to be a conditional succession agreement. Murmurs spread around the room. One shareholder leaned forward. Succession? I thought ownership was the only issue. Nathaniel shook his head. Ownership determines who possesses the company. Succession determines who deserves to lead it. Every eye shifted back to the document. The chairperson continued reading silently before stopping at one paragraph. He adjusted his glasses and read it aloud. If the acting executive leadership knowingly removes or attempts to discredit the appointed custodian responsible for protecting the founding governance, the principal owner reserves the immediate right to dissolve the existing executive authority and appoint new leadership without further approval. The room fell into complete silence. Logan's face lost all color. He understood exactly what those words meant. Everything that had happened yesterday was not simply cruel. It had triggered a clause that had been sitting quietly inside the company's original legal framework for 7 years. Nathaniel slowly turned toward Jasmine. There is only one question left. She looked at him, uncertain. What question? He smiled with quiet respect. Whether you are willing to accept the future that you spent years protecting. Around the table, every shareholder waited for her answer, knowing that whatever she said next would decide not only who led Halcyon Capital Group, but whether the Pierce family's era would end before the day was over. The greatest victories are never about taking back what you lost. They are about becoming someone who no longer needs the people who walked away. The room remained silent as Nathaniel Cross waited for Jasmine's answer. Every shareholder, every executive, every member of the Pierce family watched her with the same question in their minds. She looked around the table one last time before taking a slow breath. I did not come back because I wanted this chair, she said. I came back because the truth deserved a seat in this room. Nobody interrupted her. Even Logan kept his eyes fixed on the table. Jasmine continued. For years I believed loyalty meant staying quiet. I believed that if I worked harder, sacrificed more, and asked for less, eventually people would remember who stood beside them when everything was uncertain. I was wrong. Loyalty without respect becomes permission for someone to overlook your value. Nathaniel smiled quietly, saying nothing. The shareholders exchanged thoughtful glances. The chairperson finally spoke. Mrs. Brooks, under the succession agreement, you have the legal authority to accept executive leadership if you choose. Jasmine looked down at the blue folder resting in front of her. It had carried the weight of 7 forgotten years. She gently closed it and smiled for the first time that day. Then I accept, she said. Not for revenge. Not to prove anyone wrong. I accept because this company deserves leaders who remember the people building it every single day. A quiet wave of approval moved across the room. The chairperson immediately called for the vote. One by one, the shareholders raised their hands. The decision was unanimous. Logan Pierce was removed as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. The remaining executive appointments tied to his authority were dissolved under the original succession agreement. Sienna lowered her eyes, realizing there was nothing left to hold on to. Victoria covered her mouth, unable to believe the family that had once controlled every conversation no longer controlled anything at all. Logan slowly stood. For a moment, Jasmine thought he might argue. Instead, he walked toward her and stopped a few feet away. I spent years believing I built this company, he admitted quietly. Now I realize I was standing on a foundation someone else protected. Jasmine looked at him with calm eyes. There was no anger left, only clarity. The company was never the hardest thing we built, she replied. Trust was. And that is the one thing you chose to throw away. Logan nodded once. He knew there was no answer to that. He extended his hand, not expecting forgiveness, only hoping to leave with a little dignity. Jasmine shook it politely. Nothing more, nothing less. Some endings do not need dramatic speeches. They only need acceptance. Later that afternoon, Jasmine walked through the executive floor again. This time, employees did not avoid her eyes. They stood from their desks one after another. No one had been instructed to do it. There was no applause, no cameras, just quiet respect earned over years that most of them had never fully understood until now. Nathaniel watched from the hallway before preparing to leave. Jasmine caught up with him near the elevator. Why did you trust me all those years ago? She asked. Nathaniel smiled as the elevator doors opened. Because everyone else told me how they planned to make money. You were the only person who asked how we planned to deserve it. Then he stepped inside, and the doors quietly closed. Months later, Halcyon Capital Group had regained the confidence of its investors, completed the Crescent Biosystems acquisition, and introduced new employee ownership and leadership programs inspired by the values Jasmine had defended from the very beginning. She never spoke publicly about what happened inside that boardroom. She did not need to. Some stories are not remembered because someone won. They are remembered because someone refused to become bitter after being betrayed. If there is one lesson worth carrying from Jasmine's journey, it is this. Never measure your worth by the people who fail to see it. The wrong people can overlook your loyalty, dismiss your sacrifice, and underestimate your strength. But character has a quiet way of waiting for the right moment. And when truth finally walks through the door, it does not need to raise its voice. It simply changes everything.